The current pandemic has changed a lot of things, and our medical education was not spared. Therefore, as the dynamic face of the pandemic and the medical education changes, so too must we demonstrate our malleability and our ability to evolve to solve emerging needs. In pursuit of that, we have, over the last few months, spent a great deal of time consulting with medical professionals, faculty, companies in other jurisdictions, and most importantly, many of you students. These consultations have concluded that traditional tutoring cannot work. Well, at least not alone. With the newly introduced access to your online classes and recordings, it gives us at Hypr Academics more reason to encourage you to attend your lectures and watch recordings, as the University of the West Indies remains the #1 authority on content for your exams. Therefore, here is the formula that we have devised. We've developed the Hypr community, a learning platform like never seen before in these parts, bringing together the convenience and familiarity of social media and a powerful learning management system. This platform will see students networking with consultants, residents, other doctors, other professionals, and other students from across the region. Students will all have free access to groups and forums dedicated to various courses, all semester long. We have collaborated with a team of medical students and doctors to source and create academic content specific to the UE syllabus, which we will deliver via our Hypr videos. We expect that these videos will bridge the gap that exists with other such offerings that do not hit the nail right on the head where the UE syllabus and Caribbean epidemiological data are concerned. These videos will be synchronized with review quizzes, exam simulations, and textual information and reference materials to set you on the right track to success. As you do this, links will direct you to groups and forums where discussions will ensue on core topics, except that it will foster 24-hour access to clarification from members and not be limited to the boundaries of a 2-hour paid tutorial. Each week, we will facilitate 2 sessions. But wait, did I not say that we will not be tutoring this year? Well, as part of our renewed approach, these 2 sessions a week will cover high-yield content and topics or aspects of topics that you have issues with. Therefore, each week, students will have the opportunity to tell us exactly what they want to gain from these sessions. Isn't that amazing? Essentially, Hypr Academics is prepared to be that 24 hours, 7 days, 12 months companion on your academic journey. We will provide you with tips, academic counseling, follow up on your study progress, and help you maintain that focus as you grapple, like us, with the realities of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have established a medical podcast where we hope to connect, educate, entertain, and advocate. We encourage you to listen on all podcast platforms as well as on our website, as we have exciting things in store for you. We have no doubt that this year will be a rewarding one for you. And with us, you have absolutely nothing to worry about. Join the Hypr community at www.hyprcommunity.com. Follow us on social media at Hypr Academics and let us help you succeed. After all, your success is our mission.
Welcome to Hypr Community. Hypr Community is a social learning network. It brings together the power and convenience of social media and superimposes it onto a learning management system. For most of you, it will be easy to recognize how similar the community's features are to your favorite social media sites, except we have dedicated this website to facilitate learning in a comfortable and familiar setting. Standard features of Hypr Community include posting to your timeline, private messaging, following other users, and connecting. Users will be able to create private and public groups and forums to join others that match their individual goals for connectivity and learning. We are excited to be partnering with faculties, consultants, residents, doctors, and other professionals to bring you groups and live topical forums that provide rich content that are moderated by the best in each field, providing second to none information for your benefit. Hypr Community will foster networking that will bring together faculties, local students, regional students, and professionals onto a platform dedicated solely to your success. Best of all, it is free for all students. Go now to www.hyprcommunity.com and sign up today. Hypr Community. Learn, grow together. Hypr Community is brought to you by Hypr Academics Jamaica Limited.
Okay, good evening to everybody and welcome to our Hypr Academics webinar. On behalf of our board and executive management team, I bid good evening to everyone joining us from across the Caribbean and the world. My name is Devon Malcolm Brewster, a final year medical student at the University of the West Indies Mona campus and the managing director at Hypr Academics Jamaica Limited, or simply Hypr. It is my distinct honor to welcome you to our inaugural 2021 anniversary webinar series. This webinar series, which this year focuses on the relevant topic of pursuing residency in the United States of America and the United Kingdom, is in celebration of our first anniversary of incorporation as a limited liability company. Starting in 2018, Hypr Academics has had a total of 3 years of dedicated service to students of the University of the West Indies under its belt. In these 3 years, we have grown from merely offering students quality and economical tutoring and textbook options to boasting a reputable cadre of services that seek to meet every need for the ideal medical student. For many businesses in the COVID-19 era, COVID-19 relegated them to stagnation or even closure, but not for Hypr Academics. Innovation and willpower guided us into a new era of online tutoring, unlike anything that had been done before at the Uni Mona. Strategic partnerships with a team of medical students and medical doctors catapulted Hypr Academics to a revolutionary force to be reckoned with. Taking the bold step to incorporation on July 16, 2020, signaled our renewed commitment to a vision that enables us to be the bridge that links every student to their successful future. It comes when nerves are still pathologically stimulated in the aftermath of high-tension contract negotiations between doctors and the government of Jamaica that eventually led to an island-wide junior doctors sick-out. This situation has sparked conversations among students and doctors about pathways to career advancement outside of the region. In pursuit of that, we present this webinar series hoping that every participant, student, and professional alike may benefit from the wisdom and experience of our young and dynamic speakers, Drs. Anthony Alexander, Joelle Wright, and Rochelle Smith. We invite you to pay keen attention as these presenters speak, making a note of your questions, which we will facilitate during the question and answer segment after the initial presentation. Thank you very much for joining us, and do consider following us on Instagram at Hypr Academics to interact with us and learn more about what we do. Before I move on, I just want to first of all apologize for the technical difficulty that has limited our capacity on Zoom. Apparently, the purchase of a large meeting was not successful for some reason. However, we invite you to encourage your colleagues and friends to join us over at Hypr Academics on our YouTube channel, where everyone can participate. In addition to that, we will be monitoring the questions that are posed on the YouTube channel as well, and that will enable us to have everyone participate as fully as possible. So without further ado, I proceed now to introduce to us the speakers for this evening's proceedings. So we start with Dr. Anthony Alexander, who graduated with distinction from the Faculty of Medical Sciences at the University of the West Indies Mona campus in 2012, where he was a member of the University Singers, both as a student and as an alumnus. He's in the final year of his residency in anesthesiology in Chicago and is currently interviewing for fellowships in pediatric anesthesia. He has an interest in medical education with a focus on improving diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field. So we have Dr. Anthony Alexander. We also have Dr. Joelle Wright, who graduated from the University of the West Indies Mona campus's MBBS program in 2016. He is currently a postgraduate year one in internal medicine at the Eaglewood Health. Given his passion for rheumatic diseases, he is an active member of the Lupus Foundation of Jamaica, and he also hopes to pursue a fellowship in rheumatology. With that said, I turn over to Drs. Joelle Wright and Anthony Alexander as they lead us through this evening's proceedings.
Thank you, Devon. Hi, I'm Joelle, as was previously introduced. I graduated in 2016 from the University of the West Indies, and I had absolutely no intentions to do the USMLEs or to leave Jamaica to do internal medicine. Internal medicine was a dream, but I really just intended to do it in Jamaica at the University of the West Indies, and then probably leave later on to do a fellowship. So I did internship at the Kingston Public Hospital. Then after that, I did senior health officer year at the health center for 4 months, and I did dermatology and pulmonology together at the National Chest Hospital. And then I did rheumatology and general medicine at KPH. Following that, I got into residency at UE for the DM program, and then I abruptly quit after a year to pursue the USMLEs. And while working, after I had left the university, the DM program, I had worked in private practice for a while. As I had said, I had no intentions to leave Jamaica initially, but after a year of residency, I think there were multiple factors that led to my termination of the contract. One of them was just extreme burnout and just feeling completely overwhelmed. I was also encouraged by a few consultants or senior doctors that I knew to do the USMLEs. Also, I felt there was a bit of a disconnect between what I was reading, in the medical literature and what I was actually practicing. Also, I thought, you know what, I'm kind of young, the world is large, so, why not? So this is where we started, and this is how it's going. The picture at the top there, that's me at KPH as an SHO with a unit of blood back there in the background that I probably collected myself manually from the blood bank earlier that day without complaining. And the picture below that is me in the residence room at UE, climbing over the partition because we got locked out of the room. Those are some good times. And the picture on the right, that's me a few weeks ago starting residency here at Englewood Health.
Hi guys, let me just start by thanking everybody for coming out today. It really warms my heart to see so many of you really taking an interest in just taking this next step in your careers. I remember a time when people would do USMLEs and we would, not hear about it because it was this big secret, because it was frowned upon. And it is really good to see so many people stepping up to the plate and making this change for their careers. So I'm Anthony, graduated in 2012 from the MBBS, did my internship at Spanish Town Hospital. Then I did SHO at University Hospital. I did 6 months in urology because initially I had actually planned to be a general surgeon. I applied to the DM in general surgery, didn't quite hear back from them whether or not I'd be interviewed or not, but it turned out really to work out in my favor because in the second part of SHO, I did anesthesia. And I found that that would be something that would, be more of a fit for me, both in terms of the sort of personalities that I met while I was doing anesthesia, but also in terms of the quality of life that I wanted to have. I did 2 years as an MO at KPH while I was preparing for USMLEs. And then my boss at KPH said, they knew that I was preparing for match, but they were like, since you're here, you should take that time, join the DM and, do something productive in the meantime. So I joined the DM in 2016. I matched for anesthesia in 2017, but I had to delay my residency for a year because I had this whole catastrophic life event. And so I started in residency in 2018. And as Devon said, I'm currently completing the residency and I'm going to do a fellowship in pediatric anesthesia. Why I decided to take this path, many reasons. I think we all know that the quality of training that we get is really influenced by the sort of resources that we have. I certainly think that, and anybody from you will tell you that our training has really served us well when we've come to the US, because we are clinically sound physicians, but the sort of exposures that I've had since I've been here, just because of greater availability of resources, has really expanded my knowledge of anesthesia, the sort of cases that I've gotten to do, the sort of anesthesia techniques that are available to me, the volume, the acuity. Really, it's been such a good thing for my own learning and for my own career development. Apart from that, there is the problems that we have to deal with working conditions. For me in anesthesia, it's always been that I did 24 hours and then I went home. But I know for the other subspecialties, you do a 24 and then you'd have to do a whole day of work after. You do 2 days on the weekend, and then Monday you're gone again, Monday morning, like you weren't in the hospital for 2 days. And moving here, that is never a problem because the ACGME protects the residents in terms of how many hours they can work without getting a break. So working conditions, salary, it's higher as a resident here, but it is of course offset by an increase in terms of cost of living. But that when you're done with your residency, you will be able to find a job at the level that you're trained at, and you'll be able to earn at the level that you're trained at, which is a big pull for a lot of us who have decided to take this path. I wouldn't say that there aren't any cons. I mean, for one, you have to spend a lot to do these exams. You have to pack up everything, move to another country. A lot of people don't have family here. For a lot of people, it's a culture shock, honestly. The learning curve is definitely steep when you just start being used to a new medical system, being, for a lot of people, their first introduction to an electronic medical record. And, documentation is very big in the US in terms of in medicine. But I can honestly say to everyone that there has never been a moment, and I'm going 4 years now, where I woke up and I was like, you know, this was a mistake, this was a bad decision. And every day I am very grateful and I'm very happy that I was able to do this move. And I would encourage everyone who can to do the same, because honestly, you will not regret it.
Great. So let's get started. So the first step, well, I've put together a sequential order, but things don't necessarily have to be done in this order, but I put together a sequential order of just pretty much the steps from the moment you decide that you want to do the USMLEs all the way to interviews and matching. And just to kind of give you an idea, I've also put in parentheses the costs that are associated with each of these steps. So the first thing is registering with the ECFMG, and that's the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates. This is a body that works to certify international medical graduates, or IMGs, to be able to work and to practice medicine, to do medical residency in the US. So first things first, just paying US $150, registering with the ECFMG. It's very straightforward, uploading information about yourself, demographic information, your medical education credentials. Secondly, then you want to book an eligibility period, which is a 3-month period within which you plan to sit the step 1 exam and pay for the step 1 exam. These are the prices for this year. $975 US for step 1. My advice for that is to just commit to doing it within the shortest possible time, a set time. There are persons, sometimes, people end up stretching this out over a year or 2 years, back and forth, starting, studying, stopping and studying. And I wouldn't recommend that, because 1, it's just discouraging to be doing something for so long. And 2, you forget a lot of things that you studied and you have to go back. And I find that for a lot of persons that just is very discouraging, and you don't really want to just get stuck in that pattern just for years of trying to complete step 1. Also, I would say to be realistic regarding the timeline that you want to work with. And that's just regarding the time that's needed to study for exams, just based on your work situation. If you're working at KPH, that, you obviously have much less time on your hands to study than someone who's working in private practice from Monday to Friday, who gets to go home every day. You want to think about how long you've been out of academia. In my experience, after internship, I went straight into internal medicine. And so I was still constantly reading, I was still constantly exposed to things in internal medicine. And I would say the majority of questions in the USMLEs stem from an internal medicine background. So these are the things that you have to take into consideration. The average preparation time for step 1 is about 6 months. Thirdly, you want to book an eligibility period and pay for step 2, also $975 US. The prep time for that is about 3 months. And finally, exam-wise, the occupational English test, that's US $455. This is a test that the ECFMG has used since last year because of the pandemic to ascertain the clinical skills for IMGs. Previously, the USMLEs had step 2 CK and step 2 CS, the clinical skills exams, but because of the pandemic, that exam had to be completely scrapped. So they use this occupational English test to determine how well you're able to function in the medical context in the English language. So being able to speak, read, write, and listen English appropriately.
A few tips in terms of scheduling. What order is best for taking steps is a question that a lot of people ask, and I think it's an individualized decision, and it's based on your work, your other work obligations. For me, for example, I chose to take step 2 while I was doing my SHO in urology, because step 2 is, for me, it was an easier exam than step 1. And on urology, the workload was heavy. It might be different for you. In terms of the time you need to take to study for these exams, again, another thing that you have to take on a person-to-person basis. I think before, where step 1 had a greater weight, then focusing on step 1 for a longer period of time might have been a good idea. But as we know, starting next year, step 1 will be pass-fail, And so there'll be a greater weight on step 2 CK as the only scored exam that you will have. So it might be that you might have to focus for an even longer time on step 2 CK in order to knock that out of the park so that you can get a good score. In terms of setting the date, I've seen people set a date and they're not quite ready for the exam. And that's something that you want to avoid doing, because once you pass that exam, the score that you have will be the score that you keep forever. So, you have to make sure that you choose an eligibility period where you're confident that you will be at least close to ready. You're able to delay the exam to the next eligibility period. So for example, your first period was January, February, March. You're able to delay it to April, May, June. But if at the end of June, you find that you're still not ready for the exam and you have to re-register, you have to pay the $975 again. So just be very strategic in how you schedule your exam. You want to have your scores by September of the cycle that you're applying, or your score should be on the way to be ready by September. And that means that you should have finished your last exam about August. So if you want to apply next year, you would have finished all your exams by August this year so that you can apply in September of this year. In terms of how to study, do not make the mistake of thinking that you're doing MBBS all over. You have that knowledge already. What you want to add is very high yield information that will help you to pass this exam. And with that in mind, close up the Harrisons. You don't need to take up your NETA. There's no reason to do that. Your Bible for these exams is the first aid for the steps. There's a first aid for each step, and that will be your base. For me, I found that I needed additional information for some topics, for example, biochemistry and pharmacology, because I was so far outside of medical school that those things were a little foggy for me. So for those, I decided to use the Kaplan lecture notes to supplement what was in the first aid. Your other big pillar will be your question banks. UWorld question bank is the most popular one, and it will be very useful for you. I aimed to go through the question banks at least twice before my exams. And how I would go through them is that I would read the chapter in first aid or Kaplan, as the case might be. Then I would do the question bank. So you're able in the question bank to select, for example, all the biochemistry questions. I would do them in tutor mode, and in tutor mode, you do the question and you immediately get an explanation. Is a couple paragraphs long, which is also studying. And then I'd go through all of the questions at least once. I'd go through the questions a second time, just to make sure that all the things that I had missed in the first pass, I sort of cement in the second pass. Another approach that some people find was that in the second pass, you might do all the questions that you got wrong the first time. There's an exam called the NBME, which some people do because it can be predictive of how well you will do in the USMLEs. I did it for step 1, but I did it for step 2, sorry, but I didn't do it for step 1 because I didn't find it's helpful. But any extra resource that you can get with questions will help you to pass your exams. And again, I know this is quite expensive. So if you do have friends or colleagues who went through this, you can ask them for their resources. I had a friend so similarly, I went through just the first aid and just the Kaplan for biochemistry and immunology. I had a friend who had done this 2 years before me. So I literally just went and borrowed her Kaplan books. They were 2014 books, but the information didn't change. USMLE on a budget. And I agree, the UWorld, I think, is a good way to gauge your readiness for the exams. In addition, the UWorld does give you a simulation test. And I do think that the scores that I got on the simulation test, they actually did represent the scores that I did get in actuality from the exams. So great, now that we've gotten our exams out of the way, hopefully, there is now this pathway application that we now have to go through.
These pathways are 6 pathways that the ECFMG requires that you satisfy the requirements of to say that you're skilled or you're certified to be able to work in the US. And this has now happened again because of the pandemic. So previously, step 2 CS would prove whether or not you're functional in a medical setting. But now, in the absence of step 2 CS, which was sort of like an OSCE, they now need to determine, can you converse properly with patients? Can you understand what they're saying? Can you work in the medical field? So the application fee is $900 US, and most of us, once we've completed internship, we'll be going along pathway 1. And satisfying the requirements for pathway 1 means that you would have had a license, or you'd have been graduated from medical school from 2015 onwards, and you successfully passed the OET exam, and you would need a letter of good standing from the Medical Council of Jamaica. So pretty much you just want to make sure that you have all of your CMEs and that you've registered with them annually, and that you've had absolutely no problems with the MCJ, or else you might have difficulties moving forward. Additionally, I will just say to review the ECFMG site regularly, because there might be changes, and you want to keep abreast as it relates to things that you need to know to move forward without any problems. So we've been approved, or pathway has been approved. So your pathway 1 has been approved, and now you're ready to apply to residency. So registering or residency applications, you have to register for the electronic residency application service, or ERAS. And of course, as with everything, there is a cost associated with that. You have to buy an ERAS token, which is US $155. It is a form that pretty much you have to fill out online regarding your demographics, your medical education, research, hobbies, pretty much everything about your life online. In addition to that, there are other things that you do need to upload, supplementary information that has to be uploaded, and that's a personal statement. We'll talk about that a little later. Letters of recommendations, we'll also speak about that later. The medical student performance evaluation that we get from our faculty that you have to request from the Faculty of Medicine at UWI. Again, you have to pay the faculty for that. An ECFMG status report that lets the programs know about your medical education credentials and whether or not you are ECFMG certified. A photograph, a professionally done photograph. Well, the one that I've used for Hypr Academics advertising, that's the photograph that I had used for residency applications. Authorizing release of USMLE transcripts, and then applying to programs. Which I just have some $ here in parentheses because it's quite expensive depending on the number of programs that you apply to. Typically, for IMGs or international medical graduates, you really should apply to at least 100 programs. So typically, the cost can range from about $1,000 to $2,000 to apply to programs. And the point of this is that you want to increase your chances of getting into a program. As an international medical graduate, you're just another name, another face on a piece of paper. Nobody knows you, nobody cares. So you really want to broaden your chances of getting into a program.
So how do we choose programs? There are hundreds and hundreds of programs here. What I use was a program called Match a Resident, where you would put in the program, the specialty you're applying to. You'd put in your USMLE scores. You'd put in, your research, if you had any research experience and that sort of thing. And they would come up with a list of programs that they think would be a good fit for you. The bottom line is that you have to apply broadly. So even though I got that list from Match a Resident, I also went and did some research about other programs, some other big name programs that you can, throw into the mix. Again, the more interviews that you get, the more, there's a chance that you'll match. And so it's very important that you apply quite broadly.
Wait, sorry. I just want to mention also that there are other tools that we can use to know sort of which programs to apply to. There's Residency Explorer. I believe that one started last year. So you can plug in your scores, your research experience, your work experience, and it just lets you know what programs you're most likely to match into. But that's just on paper. You have to think about programs that there are a lot of Jamaicans at, for example, and apply to those programs. the program that I'm at now, honestly, was not near the top of the list at all for Matcha Resident nor for Residency Explorer. So you have to think about where you see a lot of Jamaicans and where best your chances are highest of getting into a program. Also, because as each year goes by, you have more and more IMGs applying. You want to let persons know, colleagues, that if you know that you're in a program, you want to say, hey, I'm applying, can you just put in a word to the program coordinator for me? And in that way, your application may be reviewed by the program director, and they can now determine if they want to interview you or not.
So these are really the components of creating a strong residency application. And they're doing a strong CV, a good personal statement, and getting very solid letters of recommendation. In terms of your CV, the aim of the CV, and that's the thing that you put into ERAS, is that you want to demonstrate to the program that your experiences and that your accomplishments make you a good fit for the specialty. You have to think carefully about all the things that you do in medical school and after. I mean, I know a lot of you are, members of SCOME, SCAF, y'all volunteer here, you tutor here and there, because all of those things put together will make you a candidate which will stand out on paper. It's very important for you to highlight relevant aspects of your experiences for your target audience. For example, I just applied to a pediatric anesthesia fellowship, and in my CV, I mentioned that I did, a partial residency in Jamaica, but I was very careful to specify that I spent 6 months at the Bustamante Hospital for Children, the only freestanding children's hospital in the English-speaking Caribbean. And, you have to be honest and realistic. You're not going to tell them that you cured cancer, but you have to be complimentary, because a lot of the experiences, a lot of the clinical experiences that we have here will set us apart from other candidates that are applying. I included here this was my residency application CV, where I, detailed that I was a junior resident at KPH, but I also spelled out really what that involved. And that made me look like a good candidate on paper, because I knew what I was talking about, and I had an experience which would be useful to the program that I applied to.
Also, I would just say to have your personal statement, well, not remember the next slide. I would actually say to have your personal statement reviewed by persons who do this sort of thing, persons who may be in academia, to, multiple people, to just kind of critique what you have written so that you can give your best chances of representing yourself in a good light. Yeah,
a lot of people will ask about research in terms of a lot of people are applying. And I know that, when I was in medical school, there wasn't really the machinery to involve us as medical students in research. And that's a big thing, because, you're applying to these programs, you think that all the other American grads are going to come with a whole, bunch of papers and so on. What can you do about that? Easy things to do as research are case reports, a medically challenging case, an oral presentation at your local conferences. I included this Jamaica Cancer Care and Research Institute because somebody I know who just matched to Northwestern Medicine for pathology did work with this program, and because of that, he was able to match at such a prestigious program. That's something that's available to you in Jamaica. Long story short is that you need to focus on the things that you have done. A lot of you have done, oral presentations in your department, and focus on those things, and those things can count as, your research experiences on your CV. In terms of your personal statement aims to show your interest in the specialty, really. You want to show what personal characteristics that you have that would make you a super match for the residency. It's important that the personal statement stands out, right? These program directors are reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those personal statements. So you have to write it in such a way that when they see your personal statement, it stands out from the pile that they have in front of them. I included this example of what my personal statement, the first paragraph of my personal statement looks like. It was dramatic for absolutely no reason, but it was, I think, one of the best pieces of writing that I've done, and I was really proud of it, and it really helped me to get a match into my residency. When you write your personal statement, have somebody else review it, somebody, as Joel said, somebody who is probably used to reading things for admissions, but also somebody who is good at writing, good at proofreading, because you don't want to have a shoddy personal statement, because a personal statement with errors sort of reflects poorly on you as a candidate.
I just want to add also that there are consultants, not medical consultants, but consultants their jobs are really to review persons who are trying to apply to programs, admissions really. And you can actually hire a consultant to kind of help you write your personal statements, write your CV to set them up. Naturally, that's just going to be at a greater cost. So you can determine or decipher if that's something that you want to do, but it's an available option if you really think you need the additional help.
In terms of your letter of recommendation, it's very important that you build relationships with your consultants and your mentors who are going to be writing those personal statements. You don't want somebody to write a personal statement which is sort of wishy-washy. You need to select your writers carefully. What I did when I was going to ask for a recommendation is that I would approach somebody and I would say, hey, I'm applying for this. Would you feel comfortable writing me a strong letter of recommendation? And you have to specify a strong letter of recommendation, because some people are going to put two words together and they won't reflect well on you. So you have to select your writers very carefully. And this is the time when you're going to build up a relationship with mentors so that you can get those letters, because they're going to be very valuable to you. You have the option to see the letter before it's sent off. There are pros and cons to that, because if you choose to see the letter, the program director is alerted that you saw the letter, and they might feel that you might have had some input in writing the letter. So a letter that you do not see might carry more weight than one that you did not waive your right to see. And I included this slide because this is actually data straight from the residency match. There's a document which is called Charting Outcomes in the Match. And what I really want to highlight on this slide is that your chance of matching, if you look at this column which says non-US IMGs, your chance of matching is increased based on the number of programs that you ranked. So you see that the people who ranked 6.6 programs were more likely to match than those who didn't match. They ranked on average 2.4 programs. And so based on all the data that we have available, these are some straightforward advice that they said that we should give to international medical graduates who are applying. One is that you want to rank all of the programs that you really want. Do not think about whether they want you. If you want to go to the program, put them in your rank list. It's important to include a mix of both the highly competitive programs as well as less competitive programs. Include all of the programs on your list where the program has expressed an interest in you, and also where you would be okay going. So if you go to a program and you feel like, boy, I would rather not match than to go to this program, I would leave it off the rank list, because a big part of interview is to trust your gut. Sometimes you go and the people look like they're not very happy. You get a sort of feeling that the program is not the one that really takes care of their residents. So trust those gut feelings. Do not rank that program. And as I said, include all your qualifications in the application, but know that you do not have to have the highest USMLE scores. You do not have to have publications. You do not have to participate in research to match successfully. And this is information, these guidelines are directly from ERES themselves. So I know a lot of you are feeling, you know, discouraged. Oh, I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't have US clinical experience, I haven't done any research. All of that taken into consideration, you still have a chance of matching.
Right. So next on our next stop is interviews. So now we've applied on ERAS, and we've finally gotten an email in our inbox that someone is interested in, or somebody like saw your application and wants to interview you. There now interviews in the past pre-COVID. You'd have to fly to each of these interviews. So this is a good thing, in that interviews are going to be from Zoom. So there are many resources online that let you know what's the best thing to do as it relates to, you have to think now, you're at home now. So you have to think about internet connectivity, you have to think about the lighting, you have to think about all these all these various things. There are many resources you can find online to know how to set up a successful an appropriate Zoom interview. There are also resources online that let you know the types of questions that typically you may be asked. Again, I went through scores of these questions, and unfortunately for the majority of my interviews, I was not asked a lot of commonly asked questions, but it's okay. You can be on your feet, be witty, and be yourself. So I think that's it regarding interviews. One thing I definitely want to say is that you definitely want to sleep well the night before the interviews. You don't want to show up to the interviews pop down and just unable to think. You definitely want to be on your feet, well rested and fed before the interviews. Then following your interviews, you've had successful interviews. To be able to match, the final thing is that you have to apply with the National Resident Matching Program. And this is a body for $85. And this is a body that pretty much allows you to rank programs in your preference, as well as programs to rank you in their preference, and matches you together based on how each of you falls, how you fall on each of the lists that were generated. I've included a little slide here from the main match of this year, actually. Yes, my cycle, which just kind of lets you know how the changes have been over the years, or between 2020 and 2021. As you can see, since between 2020 and 2021, there were increased positions that were offered, but there was also increased IMG participation. Typically each year, IMG participation just increases. In 2020, we saw that 61% of IMGs matched, but that sort of fell in 2021 to 56.7. Don't be disheartened by that number. About half of IMGs do match. And you can see that it's stratified also between the US citizen IMGs, and US citizen IMGs are those that are US citizens, but they went to medical schools, for example, in the Caribbean, in Saba or Spartan, or they went to St. George's University. They had a higher rate of matching than the non-US citizen IMGs, like persons like us who went to UE.
So a quick note on visas. There are two main visa types that you will encounter when you're coming here. There's your J1 visa, which is really a student exchange visa, and most programs will sponsor that. The downside is that there's a waiver requirement, which means that at the end of the program, you either have to return to your home country or go to a medically underserved area before you can transition to a different visa type. I wouldn't worry about that so much. A lot of these medically underserved areas are really in big cities. For example, there are medically underserved areas in Chicago, for example. I'm here on an H-1B visa, which is a different type. It's a specialty occupation visa. It has an easier transition to a green card, but the difference is that it requires step 3. So you have to do step 3 before it is match day, at some point before match day. The downside is that less fellowships will sponsor an H-1B visa, but again, like that doesn't really bear out in practice, because most of us here on H-1B visas are able to find a suitable fellowship position after residency. So one way or the other, each of them has their upsides and their downsides, and it's up to you to decide based on the programs that you're applying to, which visa type is good for you.
And I'll also add that some programs only sponsor J1 visa. So there's some programs that will just not sponsor H1B. So as Anthony mentioned, there are pros and cons to both visa types.
And I just included these as some online resources. Reddit has, a lot of, subreddits for the steps. There's a student doctor forum where you can find other people, other IMGs who are going through the same thing as you, who can, give you advice about how to go about matching. And I included the NRMP main residency match data so that you can go there and see for yourself in terms of it divides by specialty the type of candidates that are more likely to match in terms of their scores, their research, that sort of thing, how many programs rank them, so that you're able to sort of gauge on your own, your likelihood of matching. But all in all, I'd say just go for it. Be very careful about how you're putting together your application. Rank all the programs that you're interested in, interview and apply broadly, and you will very likely be successful, as you can see from the match data that Joel showed us. And that is the end of our presentation.
Thank you so much, Joel and Anthony, for this very riveting presentation. Comments have been coming in as you've been going on, and persons are finding the information that you have presented to be very, very useful. So thank you for that so far. So guys, we are just going to transition shortly into our question and answer segment. But first, we're going to have a quick break just to run one advertisement. It won't be 7 minutes. It will be just about 2.5 minutes. And then we will move on to
Hey guys,
question and answer.
Welcome to Hypr Community. Hypr Community is a social learning network. It brings together the power and convenience of social media and superimposes it onto a learning management system. For most of you, it will be easy to recognize how similar the community's features are to your favorite social media sites, except we have dedicated this website to facilitate learning in a comfortable and familiar setting. Standard features of Hypr Community include posting to your timeline, private messaging, following other users, and connecting. Users will be able to create private and public groups and forums to join others that match their individual goals for connectivity and learning. We are excited to be partnering with faculties, consultants, residents, doctors, and other professionals to bring you groups and live topical forums that provide rich content that are moderated by the best in each field, providing second to none information for your benefit. Hypr Community will foster networking that will bring together faculties, local students, regional students, and professionals onto a platform dedicated solely to your success. Best of all, it is free for all students. Go now to www.hyprcommunity.com and sign up today. Hypr Community. Learn, grow together. Hypr Community is brought to you by Hypr Academics Jamaica Limited.
Okay, so guys, we are back for what we hope to be an exciting question and answer segment. Before I go into the question and answers, let me just first advise you of how we're going to do this. So for those who are joining on Zoom, you have the opportunity to ask your questions audibly if you wish. But what we would want you to do is to first send a direct message to the host account, which is the account from which I'm speaking. And you can just indicate verbal and your question, and then just wait to be acknowledged by your name being called. And then you can temporarily unmute your microphone to ask the question and then quickly mute it back. And for others, both on Zoom as well as on YouTube, you can just type in your questions and we will relay your questions to Doctors Joelle and Anthony. Let me first start with a question just so that I can clarify it for everyone. One of the questions I was asked is, how does one get into the UK system? The United Kingdom aspect of this webinar series will take place tomorrow at 6 p.m. Jamaica time. Okay, so join us at 6 p.m. Jamaica time tomorrow to hear from Dr. Rochelle Smith as she shares with us about how to pursue residency in the United Kingdom. So just want to put that out there for those who may not have been clear that it's two separate webinars. So we're going to start with the first question posed by Christian Paul Singh to both doctors. Did you have any U.S. clinical experience when you applied to match, whether it is observership, elective, or externships? And additionally, did you have any notable publications?
I'll start answering. I had no US clinical experience, and again, because so no to both of them. I had no US clinical experience and I had no publications. Again, this is something that I decided very last minute that I was going to do. To be specific, I left the DM program at UE in 2019 in the beginning of July. And then I started studying by September, sat step one by January. So I had absolutely no time really to do all of these, things. So no.
And same for me. I didn't have any US clinical experience and I didn't have any notable publications. Again, as I said earlier, the match data shows that you can still match without them. If you can get them, of course, it's a way to make your application more attractive. In particular, those outside rotations sometimes can sort of serve as an audition so that when you apply, then they would have already seen your face. They know who you are, they know what you can do. So if you're choosing to go that route, then I would suggest to do it in one, of course, a specialty that you intend to apply to, and in a place that you also intend to apply to for it to have maximum benefit. Of course, it will benefit you either way, but for it to have maximum benefit, to do those two things so that, hey, when your application comes on that program director's desk, they're like, oh, hey, is Joelle, who I know, who came here in January. He was a really smart medical student and he'd be a good fit for my program. But no to both questions.
Thank you very much, Joelle and Anthony. Another question that is common amongst the questions coming in is, would you recommend writing USMLE Step 1 during 4th year of medical school at UE? And another version of the same question asks, really and truly, how do you feel about pursuing USMLE examinations while in a medical school at UE?
I don't think I could have done it, but that's when step 1 was scored and it carried a greater weight. Now that it's pass fail, it's going to be pass fail. If I were in the position, then maybe yes, I would do it in 4th year, because that's the year where you're doing like rotating subspecialties. It was for the most part a lighter year. So if I had to do it again, and step 1 was now pass fail, I think I would have done it. I would have been able to manage it in 4th year. In internship, again, it's the same thing. If I did it as is, where I needed to get a 250 odd, I couldn't have done that in an internship because I know myself. And internship was a very challenging year. We were always tired. We worked very long hours. But again, now that it's pass fail, I would have done it in my internship. And I know other classmates of mine, who did fresh out of medical school, were gone before SHO. So it is possible. And it's even more possible now that step 1 will be scored on a pass fail basis.
Yeah, I would say, it'd be good to get it out of the way in medical school, if possible. Because it just sort of saves time. For example, like we left medical, well, I left medical school in 2016, and then I never ended up sitting exams until 2020. You know, just sort of like years, just sort of going, quote unquote, going to waste per se, but not quite, because every experience really is valuable. But it would be good to get it out of the way before starting to work, so that you can have a seamless transition right out of medical school and then into residency in the US, if possible.
Thank you very much for your answers to those questions. Okay, we're gonna go now to questions from YouTube. Just to ask this question, generally, what is the difference between step 1, 2, and 3?
So your step 1 exam is your essentially your basic medical sciences exam. So your biochemistry, your pathology, anatomy. Step 2 used to be called step 2 CK, or step 2 clinical knowledge. And that's where you apply that those basic sciences to clinical questions. So you'd have internal medicine, surgery, rheumatology, that sort of thing, infectious disease. So it's a more clinical exam. In practice, step 2 for most people is easier than step 1, because it is less nitty-gritty and more like clinical stuff, which for most people that is easier than, you know, biochemistry and pharmacology. Step 3 is also a clinical exam, but it's more like an advanced clinical exam, where in the US, they actually do that step 3 exam after their year of internship. So you are expected to have the clinical knowledge, but even more advanced, you're expected to have a clinical knowledge of somebody who has been in practice for 1 year. So it's, for me, step 3 was a similar exam to step 2, just a little more advanced.
Okay, thank you very much for that. A question coming from YouTube. Can both doctors give us a rundown of their exam preparation timelines, and also touch on how they were able to balance studying and working, please?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I pretty much started studying for step 1 in August, September 2019, and sat step 1 by January 2020. So that's about maybe about 4 or 5 months preparing for step 1. Step 2 took about 2 to 3 months to prepare for that. To be honest, again, it really depends on your work situation. So I was working part-time initially while I was trying to find a job. So I could have done it within a short space of time.
For me, it took maybe 8 months actually to do step 1, and about 5 to 6 months for step 2. But my work situation was different in that I was in a very high demand clinical setting. I was doing urology at UE for 6 months, and that was like 10 overnight calls per month. And then I did anesthesia, which also a little less demanding in terms of the call schedule, but also still a very clinically intense area. So again, as we said before, these are just general guidelines. 6 months is a good number for both exams, but you have to, again, take into consideration what else you're doing, how quickly you learn things, as well as the fact that now with changes in how things are scored, your step 2 is going to be carrying a greater weight than step 1, because it's the only score that you'll have. Obviously, you'll need to pass your exams at the first attempt, or you want to try to pass your exams at the first attempt. But at the same time, now having a good step 2 score is going to be even more important, because some programs are really weeding applicants just based on those scores at first. So they have a sort of filter. It's like, okay, you need to have such and such a score before we even consider your application. So you have to think about that when you decide how long you're going to study for these exams. So so not to be repetitive, the factors are how quick a learner you are, what are your clinical responsibilities, and really just how, what is your aim in terms of score. And those all of those things put together will help you to decide what is best for you. But 6 months is a really good number for both exams.
Thank you very much for that. And I suppose it's a nice segue into, well, not very much a segue, but really and truly someone is being a little practical with their question by asking if perhaps they they do step 1 in November, I assume November of this year. Do you think they might still be able to register to match for 2021, 2022? Or not too sure if they meant 2022, 2023.
Oh, no. If they do step 1 in November of this year,
right.
No, because you need to be ECFMG certified before you even start to think about matching. So if they do step 1 in November of this year, then they can't match until 2023.
Also, the programs would have to, you start applying for programs in September, October. So they need to have your scores to know whether or not they want to interview you. So November, I think, would be a bit too late to do step 1. Not I think, but it would be too late to do step 1.
It would be too late.
Okay.
So they would have to think about applying next year, September of 22.
Okay then. Okay, so I'm going to take one more from YouTube before going back to Zoom. A question from YouTube is, do you think there are any advantages of being a US citizen in this whole process?
100%. 100%. There is a sort of hierarchy in terms of the candidates, in that American citizens and graduates of American medical schools in the mainland are the preferred candidates for most programs, and they will get into the most prestigious programs. In terms of us who are, one, foreign trained, but also not citizens of the US, we are sort of at the lowest in terms of, the candidates that programs will consider, because not only do they not have, I guess, a way to accredit our medical education. They do by ECFMG, but names are very important to a lot of people in this country. So they know that, oh, this person went to Northwestern, this person is a graduate of Rush. Those things are very important to them, even though, I work alongside these people, and I know that a lot of graduates from our medical school are on par and even better, but because of name. But to answer your question, having a US citizenship places you above us who do not have that citizenship, because the program does not have to think about sponsoring your visa. So it makes you more likely to match.
So just to be clear, that, for example, within the category of those of us who are trained outside of the United States and not in a US university, like those of us from UE, someone who is UE trained but a US citizen would still
will be more likely to match
over us. Okay.
There's a slight advantage, just because a lot of programs, again, as a filter, weed the people who will need visas, because some of them don't sponsor visas out as a first filter.
I get you. Okay, thank you very much. Another question is also, when do you decide between a J1 visa versus a H1 visa when you're applying? Is it when you're doing step 2?
So I decided when I was applying that I would apply to programs who both sponsored H1 as well as J1 visas. The intricacy is that in order to have an H1 visa, you have to pass step 3 by match day. So you can apply without step 3. You can be considered by programs that sponsor an H1B visa without step 3, but you need to have that step 3 by match day, which is usually in March of the year that you'll be starting.
Thank you very much for that. Another question is, another practical question. Would you recommend doing step 1 this year while it is still being scored, or perhaps delaying it to when it says pass or fail?
It's kind of hard to tell, because now that it's pass fail, I don't know. I mean, we don't know what it is like. We don't have any statistics. Will the actual score that you need to pass be high or no? We don't know. But one positive I would think about waiting, again, it's kind of hard to tell the future, is that we tend, I think, to do better on step 2. So if that's a score that's going to be taken into consideration, I personally probably would have waited until it became pass fail to sit it.
Yeah, it's a lot of things are in flux now because foreign medical graduates all over the world are confused about what this new pass fail step 1 will mean for us. I think that if I knew that I was going to get a 260 in step 1, like I was confident, I would do it when I could get a 260 and somebody would look at my application and say, hey, he got a 260 in step 1. This is a really good candidate. Let's interview him. But if I didn't think I was going to knock it out the park, I think pass fail would work out better for me because, you wouldn't distinguish yourself with your score.
Thank you very much for that. Another question is, given the workload, must a working physician take an extended study leave to mount up preparation for these exams and applications? So they're asking if you should take leave or you should work and study.
I would say you just have to do what you have to do. Many people do take a leave of absence to the point now that, for example, in the DM program, when residents take a leave of absence, the consultants know what's going to happen next. They know that you're going to leave. So it's almost something that's inevitable, that you do have to take the time to study. So I actually did take a leave of absence after my year of residency. Not certain if I was going to return or not, but I did take a 6-month leave of absence, and then I actually didn't return afterwards. So I think it's something that you might have to consider. But then there are other factors, regarding income. It depends on the amount of what your budget is and just the things that you have to pay for monthly. You probably can't afford to take a leave of absence. So those are the things to weigh. You may need the time, but then you also need the money. So you have to just think about those things.
Thank you very much. Okay, so going back to some questions from YouTube, perhaps some short answer ones. So one person asked, did any of you get recommendation letters from any US doctors?
Actually, all 4 of my letters of recommendations were from US trained doctors in Jamaica: board certified rheumatologists, board certified nephrologists, endocrinologists, board certified gastroenterologists. It just happened to be those. I didn't even realize that they were actually that they were fellows of so and so college, but it just happened to be that these were persons that knew me best. So that just kind of worked out for in my benefit.
What about you, Anthony?
No, I didn't get letters of recommendation from US physicians. How it worked out for Joelle is actually pretty good because you have access to these people at UE. So them having that additional qualification will definitely bring a little bit more weight to the letter. But I didn't get US trained physicians to write my letters of recommendation.
Okay then. What happens if you don't match on the first try?
You enter the match again. There is no limit to the number of times you can enter. But the only thing is that you want to do something from one year to the next to make sure that this next year is the year that you match, whether you're going to try to do some research, if you're going to try to do an observership, maybe you're going to take a look at your application to see if there's some way that you could spruce up the application a little, maybe get other letters of recommendation from people who know you better, who are able to write very strong letters of recommendation. But if you don't get matched, don't get discouraged. I know people who have matched on the 3rd time trying. If you don't match, revamp your application and try again the next year.
Thank you very much. The next question is, after sitting the step 1 and step 2 exam, after sitting each exam, how long does it take for the scores to become available?
It depends. on the time of year and how busy exams are, I got back my step 1 score, and this is pre-COVID, after 3 weeks. My step 2 score, I got back within 2 weeks. I sat the exam in the middle of a spike of COVID in Florida. So not many people were doing exams at the time. So 2 weeks or even a little less than that, I had got back my step 2 score.
Back when I did them, it was like 6 weeks average.
Okay.
I'll say for the occupational English test, I got my score about 3 to 4 weeks after doing the exam.
Okay. Another question is, after residency in the US system, do you have to do a fellowship?
No.
Absolutely not.
Right.
You can, for people who, for example, do internal medicine, you can become an attending in internal medicine. You can become a hospitalist. For me in anesthesia, I could become an attending anesthesiologist if I wanted to. I could go into private practice. The benefit of doing fellowship for me was that I wasn't ready to start thinking about those very hard decisions in terms of visas and green cards and whatnot. I wanted an additional year to start thinking about that. That's one. And two, because the face of medicine really is changing in the US, where there is a rise of mid-level providers. In my field, it's the CRNAs, the certified registered nurse anesthetists. In other fields, it's the PAs. There is a lot of what we call scope creep, which means that mid-level providers who don't necessarily have the same level of training are creeping into the things that we do as physicians, and are sometimes able to take income from the physician providers. And so often, in order to set yourself apart as somebody who is competitive and employable, you have to do a fellowship in order to give yourself a competitive advantage. For me, I really loved pediatric anesthesia, and I thought it would be something that I could see myself doing for life. It also gives you the opportunity to be employed by an academic institution, so to go into academic medicine as opposed to private practice. If you are not fellowship trained, for the most part, you won't be able to get a position at an academic institution because you do not have that extra fellowship training.
I just want to quickly add that the decision to do a fellowship is really based on what your passion is, what you really want to do. So for some fields, for example, to the rheumatology, which is what I want to do, I have to do internal medicine first. I happen to love internal medicine, but I love rheumatology also. So I have to do internal medicine before I can get to a rheumatology fellowship. But that fellowship was the end goal for me. Some people are fine. Some people love doing hospital medicine. They're okay with being a hospitalist. So it's really up to what you want to do.
Okay, thank you for that. Could any of you clarify exactly, because one of the things when we compare what we know here in terms of the system in the region versus the United States is nomenclature tends to be a little different sometimes and confusing. So some of us may not necessarily be fully aware of what exactly is meant by a fellowship when compared with like what we know here is after you finish, you enter into a program, a residency program, and you become a consultant. Boom, that's how we see it.
We actually do have fellowships back home, in Jamaica. So in the Department of Internal Medicine. So a fellowship is what? So you do have specialties. So internal medicine, general surgery, pediatrics, those are specialties. And we know that, for example, for internal medicine, it's made up of pulmonology, neurology, nephrology, etc. Those are the subspecialties. So you do a fellowship to train in a subspecialty of a specialty. So the specialty is general surgery, but the subspecialty that you're doing a fellowship for is surgical oncology. The specialty that you're doing is internal medicine. The subspecialty that you're doing a fellowship in is nephrology, for example. UWI does offer subspecialty training or fellowships in nephrology and cardiology. So it's the same thing there as it is here. Just that we don't offer as many fellowships, obviously, that are offered in the US. That's really just the only difference.
Understood. Just to give an idea both to the participants and to our speakers that we're going to try to wrap up in about the next 7 minutes or so forth. Of course, there are a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to try to see if we can take as many of them. Let's see if we could get some from Zoom. Okay, so someone is asking, how long did it take? That's a funny question. How long did it take you to upload your information to EMSWP portal or ECFMG?
Not very long for me. You know, I think I had a 24-hour turnaround. So my experience. But it depends on what you're asking them to. I know there were things that I asked which would stand will take a week to 2 weeks, but I was actually pretty impressed, or I was pleased. I really thought I would have had to be waiting a lot longer, but I actually didn't have any issues regarding uploading of documents.
Okay. Someone is asking, would you recommend completing a residency application and applying for residency fresh out of medical school or after year 2 of internship or clinical experience?
I do it as soon as possible.
Okay.
For me, I do it as soon as possible, and I'm sure Joelle would say the same thing. Again, we are sounding like broken records because it really depends on you. A lot of us can't manage doing USMLE and 48 hours of general surgery duty. A lot of us will not be able to do that. So you have to decide what is good for you. I want to say that whatever path you take, it's already been done. I know friends of mine who did it. They didn't even do internship. I know a couple of people who didn't even do internship in Jamaica. I know a couple of people who did internship and they left after internship, didn't do SHO. I know people who did SHO, went into programs and then chose to go. So it depends on what you think you are able to do, because internship is a really hard year. And if you don't think you're able to manage it, then the obvious choice is to wait until you're in a better position to manage doing these exams and so on. The only downside to that is that there is a sort of inverse relationship in terms of your time out of training and your chances of matching. That after you've gone 5 years, it becomes 5 years out of training, it becomes less and less likely for you to match. So you have to bear that in the back of your mind. But before that, it really is up to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Here's an interesting question. Do non-Jamaicans have to attain their visas in Jamaica or in their home country? For example, I am a Trinidadian, so do I apply for visa in my home country or in Jamaica because that's where I'm studying or studying?
I'm sorry, I don't think any of us know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I would take the experience of other people who, when their visas are expired, they're able to go to Mexico to renew it. So I assume it is the same. It will transfer, that you can have a consulate outside of your home country renew your visa, but I don't know for certain. That's something that you'd have to take when the time comes.
Okay, thank you very much. I suppose this is another question asking about your personal, asking about your personal experience. What did your study schedule encompass to prepare for step 1 in terms of how you remain consistent, number of study hours per day, managing work / extracurriculars, etc., and studying? Do you have any tips?
It's, I think, the same as any other academic requirement, any academic endeavor, is that you have to plan carefully. You have to set small goals, small achievable goals. You're going to be like, okay, I'm going to do this chapter of the first aid today. I'm going to do this number of questions in my UWorld today. And you have to, achieve those goals on a day-to-day basis. so for me, it was important for me to break up the whole thing into very small and achievable goals, and to stick to those goals. I did maybe 3 hours a day, because I, of course, was in a residency and whatnot. I'd have to do it on my own time, which is in the evenings. I think 2 to 3 hours a day was really manageable for me. At the same time, they're talking about extracurriculars. I was still doing the university singers, and I made time for that. Now is the best time to do it because we're all young. We have all the energy. I mean, all the things that I could do back then in terms of going to work, preparing for USMLE, doing my rehearsals for university singers, performing with the university singers. I know I can't do them now because I'm a little older. But when fresh out of med school, you still have the energy to stay up late, still have energy to do these sorts of things. Seize on the opportunity right now and get it started. So the major tip is to be focused, to set small and achievable goals, break things into little pieces, and to be focused and consistent, because you know what the outcome of this will be, and that it will be getting a good residency, getting good training, and setting yourself up for a very successful career.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just to say that
It's 8 o'clock.
We're only gonna take 4 more questions that have already been sent, and then we will wrap up. Okay. I'm so sorry for persons who may not have gotten some of the questions answered or will not get the answer because of time constraints. However, just before we end, I will detail our plans to ensure that you have an opportunity to have those questions answered at an appropriate time. One participant asks, should a competitive specialty like orthopedics and plastic surgery be a deterrent for considering the US? Based on what people say, it seems like a very daunting thing to strive for. So essentially, they're asking if it is that high demand competitive specialties, if you should be, dissuaded from applying to those when considering the US.
I would say no. If it's something that you're really passionate about, I would say go for it. I mean, what do you have to lose other than a few thousand US dollars? But when you put it that way, there is a Jamaican who graduated in 2014, and he's currently doing a neurosurgery residency at Massachusetts General Hospital. That's probably in the top 5 or top 3 hospitals in the US. So if it's something that you're really passionate about, I would say just work hard and go for it.
Yeah, I know, like for orthopedics, I know one person in 2K11. I'm sure there are others. I don't think you should be discouraged by that sort of thing. If you are willing to work for it, it's not an impossibility, but you have to, I guess, acknowledge that it is a very competitive specialty. And with that in mind, you have to do all the things that are necessary to make sure that your application is competitive.
Again, the matching data in the link that we have at the end of the PowerPoint, it lets you know pretty much, again, for each specialty, what the average matched applicants had as it relates to their step 1 and 2 scores, their research, their work experience, that sort of thing. So kind of give you an idea as to what level you need to be on to match into that specialty.
I mean, and if I had listened to people, because anesthesia is also one of the most competitive specialties here, you can't really listen to people, because even though it's competitive, if you are also competitive, then, why not? I know 3 people from my class of 2K12 are in anesthesia in the US, and there are so many more others. So,
Thank you very much for that. Question, what has been your experience thus far in terms of working environment, interpersonal relationships, and any experience with racism?
I've been here only for a month. 2 months now. I was in the ICU for 1 month, and I don't think my worst day here would not even compare to my best day back in Jamaica at this point so far. I do think we have a good foundation and clinical sets to be able to just get through the day and to do things efficiently. We're so much used to working such longer hours and seeing so many more patients that, you know, attendings are kind of stunned, or even nurses, you know, when they have to interface with us. A few weeks ago on rounds, one of the ICU attendings was kind of bragging about how two Jamaicans a few years back in their first year diagnosed a person with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis before the MRI or before the investigations did, you know. So the experience here, I think we're really ready to work here. And no, so far I have not experienced any racism.
I'd echo what Joel is saying. I think it's a lot of work. It definitely is not a walk in the park, but it's a lot of different type of work. You are not doing the things that other allied professionals really should be doing. You're not scutting around drawing bloods, putting in IVs, transporting patients here and there. You are really focused on a lot of clinical things, which are things that are important to you and the things that you're here to be trained to do. Unfortunately, there's also there's a burden of documentation, which we don't experience as much in Jamaica because lawsuits are a big thing here. So not just lawsuits, but the way we bill and the way the hospital is paid depends on how well we document what we have done with the patient. So a lot of residents feel burdened by the fact that they've left clinic and they have to go home and do their notes because that documentation is very important. So it's a lot of different type of work. I definitely think my hours are better here. Working conditions are better here because I have all the things, are most of the things that I need to do my job. I have to do a little bit less of, you know, running around for this and running around for that, to do a little bit less of the work of other healthcare professionals. In terms of racism, I live in Chicago, so I haven't seen much of that. It's a very diverse city. Definitely you will find a little bit of microaggressions, where I think it's not just a matter of racism, but also a matter of not being from here, where, you know, some people will underestimate what you can do. I think it will really depend on where you go. I know that, you know, the race relations are very big thing in the United States, and I know it will be something that a lot of people will consider. You might decide that that's not something that you are willing to deal with, and that's also okay. But in my personal experience, I have not had a lot of problems with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so just going to kind of like blend up some repeated questions that keep coming up. Basically along the lines of pursuing USMLE while in medical school. So persons are inquiring if it is, you know, of persons who have done USMLE exams while in medical school at UE. If it is that you know of persons or would recommend, for example, taking some time, a leave of absence from the undergraduate program to pursue step one. Right. So that's a question. If you know of people doing that, if it's a common thing, is it something that you would recommend? Would you recommend, you know, doing USMLE while in medical school or taking a leave of absence to prepare? What are your thoughts? The general idea from these questions is along the lines of trying to match as soon as possible out of medical school.
Again, as we said, with pass fail step one, it's totally possible, I think, to do step one while you're still in medical school. I would not recommend you take a leave of absence because you need to graduate from medical school to apply to the residency to begin with. So that would be counterproductive to me, because you need that MBBS to apply to enter the match. So I wouldn't take a leave of absence to do the steps. And I wouldn't recommend that.
Joe?
I concur with everything that Anthony said.
Right. And another version, slight version of the question is one person suggesting if you could possibly maybe do step one in third year and step two in fourth or final year. If that sounds like a good idea.
Yep, that's fine, because if you were to do step one in third year, you would have been studying for it hopefully from about second year, and it's the basic sciences that you're doing in first and second year. So I think
that sounds like a good idea.
One might supplement your studying. And I think to an extent, you know, the studying for the steps is a little bit more comprehensive, I think. So I think it might actually end up even making a better medical student also. So I don't think that's a bad idea. And then doing step two in fourth year, I think that's not a problem either. Again, I've never done it that way, so I can't speak from a place of experience, but again, I do have classmates that did it that way. So it's definitely possible.
Do we still have Com Health in third year? I mean, that would be a very
in every
good...
year, right?
Yeah, third, fourth, and fifth year.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I promise you these are the two last questions.
No problem.
I promise you. The first one of the last two is, do you think perhaps failing any clerkships at UE and having to do them over and perhaps being delayed in terms of completing your MBBS, do you think that that might have an impact on, you know, your chances of matching into a residency in the US? A slight variation would be, do they check your transcript, or are they just interested in knowing that you have the degree?
Right, so they do look at your transcript. You have to upload your transcript to the ECFMG. You have to send your transcript to the programs. So they do look at that. Whether or not they take that into consideration, I am not 100% sure. But I mean, if avoidable, they definitely do. I mean, you don't want to have like all A's and B's and then like you have this F or D like lingering there. So if as much as possible, I know we all try to avoid failing, but I don't know how much they take that into consideration. But
I don't think it's like very high on the hierarchy of things that they're looking at.
Right. Once you have the degree, should be fine.
Okay, then thank you. And the last question, I promise you, the last question is, and you did touch on that earlier in the presentation, but just for reiteration, someone is asking, what resources did you use, each of you, for to prep for step one? For example, UWorld, USMLERX, Pathoma, etc. What resources did you use? And I would perhaps extend it to ask what resources you used for whatever steps that you did.
I think both of us happen to do the same thing. So we use first aid, which is kind of a guide as to what you need to know, and then just added some backbone to the things that, you know, needed some supplementation. So first aid personally for step one, I used first aid. I read the entire first aid, and I also used the Kaplan, the books. I read the entire biochemistry book and the immunology portion of the immunology microbiology book. And I used the UWorld question bank. That was it for step one. For step two, I only did the UWorld question bank. I didn't use the first aid or any other resource for step two CK.
But again, with this new heavier weight on CK, then it might be best to, you know, place a little more focus on step two. But again, as we said, like your first aid is gonna be your Bible for all the steps. It has all of the high yield information that you need to know. Sometimes you'll be reading your first aid and boy, making you dizzy because it's just too much concentrated information. And in those cases is where I would take it to the Kaplan, because I needed a little bit more words to understand these concepts. And it was, for Joelle, it was biochem, and immunology for me, it was biochem and like pharmacology, where I needed a little extra meat on the bones.
Also, you could probably get an idea from what works best for you in medical school. Some people love videos. So there are videos that you can use, Kaplan videos, I think, Pathoma. There are videos that resources, so you can kind of take an idea from what works for you in medical school. I personally don't like videos. I feel like you need to get to the point. Like I like to look at a text and be able to just kind of scan it through quickly. So it really depends on what your preference is generally in studying.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And with that, we'll bring an end to our question and answer segment. Joelle and Anthony, thank you so much for answering these questions, as well as thank you so much for your presentation overall. I think many students have found it very useful. They've been messaging, they've been sending in their comments, and I'm sure this video will be up on YouTube for weeks to come for persons to view. And I feel that a lot of students and as well as medical doctors will find this presentation very useful. So just want to thank you very much for that. I want to also thank all of you for joining us here this evening. Remember that we continue tomorrow at 6 p.m. Jamaican time, 7 p.m. Eastern Caribbean time, with pursuing a residency in the United Kingdom with Dr. Rochelle Smith. So be there for that. I want to also ask you, beg you, encourage you to follow us on Instagram so you can get updates, get more information about our future webinars at Hypr Academics. We believe that there is a void in our space for these sort of useful discussions that can help medical students and doctors alike. And so we plan on having these a lot more frequently. And so want to just encourage you guys to follow us and to tune in. Thanks again, Joelle and Anthony. And see you guys tomorrow at 6 p.m. Jamaican time, 7 p.m. Eastern Caribbean time. Until then, have a good night, a good day tomorrow, and we will see. Blessings.